Okay. Okay, so thank you everyone for the time, and thank you for our speaker. I hope you can see my face right now with a small light, and thank you very much for Jane from Epic DNA, and also Irshad from YSA Southeast Asia to become our third panelist. In this webinar, we will talking about how the philosophical that driving people to become a change maker in their respective area. So the first things that we need to know, because there are a proverb in Indonesia that people need to know to love you. So please give us a little bit background from both of panelists. Maybe it can be start with Irshad first, and then Jane can also introduce.
Okay, so a little bit about what I do within my organization.
Yes, sure.
Okay, so for everyone watching, hi guys. My name is Irshad. I am the co-founder of an organization called Young Sustainable Impact Southeast Asia. You guys can hear me, right? Like it's all good.
Yeah, there's a little bit of disturbance, but we can still hear you.
Yeah.
Wait, let me try to change my audio settings. See what does better.
Okay, light.
Okay, is it any better now, or is it like the same?
Yeah, it's the same, but it's okay.
Or is it worse?
I think it was better earlier.
Okay, I can't hear you, so I think it's worse. I'm just gonna... is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, let's just go with it. So, so a little bit about my organization. So our mission is to empower Southeast Asian youth to solve sustainability challenges. The main way that we do this is that we run an annual innovation program. The purpose of this innovation program is to bring a mixture of people, either those that have started ventures before and people who haven't started ventures before, to solve challenges within 3 specific areas of sustainability. And those areas are the future of food and agriculture, clean energy transitions, as well as the circular economy with a focus on waste as well as materials. So our innovation program runs about 5 months. We've taken in 3 batches of 24 people so far, and incubated, I cannot remember how many companies. I think this year we did 13 over the past 2 years. Dang it, I really should remember how many of that, but we incubated 13 companies this year. And yeah, so that's a little bit about us. We also, I guess our differentiating factor is that we can be described as an incubator, but the main thing that we do besides give people advice on like how to start businesses within the context of Southeast Asia is that we also give them access to mentors as well as like specific advice on like the systems associated with the problems that they're trying to solve. So we curate curriculum around clean energy, food and agriculture, as well as like circular economy systems, and we put it out to our participants as well. So those are some of the things that we've done. For me personally, like I come from a biomedical engineering background, but I transitioned into the sustainability space primarily because I felt that that was one of the biggest long-term problems that we'll face. I say this, but right now the biggest problem that we're facing is very much biomedical. So, yeah, but yeah, that's a little bit of me.
Okay. Thank you, Irshad. We will hear from Jane also. Can you share a little bit about what you do? And,
Sure.
Yes, sure.
So I'm a co-founder of a company called Epic. It's a company my husband and I started with some friends. So we ended up doing this for a while. But the whole purpose is, Epic actually stands for Extraordinary People Impacting Communities. And our whole purpose is to see how do we get different segments of society to come together to solve different issues that we face in our communities? How do we activate individuals to be more civically conscious and to be active participants in what's happening in the world around us? Along the way, how do we learn through serving, and how do we become better members of society at the end of the day? In a nutshell, that's really what it's about. And we do this through several different movements. So we have a program called Epic Homes, where we build homes with different marginalized communities. We also have different initiatives where we look at infrastructure beyond housing. And we're starting to look at education and food security. So the whole point is, how do we bring people together to solve local challenges that they're facing, while really becoming better citizens of our country and better global citizens in the process. I personally am super into this particular field because I am huge on personal development, and I believe that everybody has potential that can be unlocked. It's just about finding the right resources, the right people, and the right community to unlock that within you. So it's been a wonderful process to be able to see that and to be able to be a part of it, and that's why I'm here.
Cool, superb. So to continue, my next question is about, can you give us what is the core value that brings this kind of impactful journey that already happens in many years that you done in so many great ways? What is the core values? Maybe Jane can answer it first.
Just about a drink. Yeah, personal core values that I carry. I have a lot. And sometimes it's hard to pick the ones which I really identify with. But I'll just mention a few. I think definitely believing in potential is one. And I think that's important to differentiate, because oftentimes we treat people based on their situation and their challenges, but we don't always give them the opportunity to become, to overcome, and we don't always have we don't always put in the effort to bring out that potential in different individuals. There's a quote by Carl Jung which says, "Thinking is difficult, and that's why most people judge." So drawing that line between spending time to think about a person's situation and what makes them a certain way, and what can change to unlock that individual's potential. So belief in potential. Also accountability. I think that in order to, accountability is a core value that I carry. And I think that's something that resonates with a lot of different change makers, because it's about how we're accountable to each other, how we're accountable to the planet, how we're accountable to business as well. And I think if you think about the world in terms of a circular economy, you need to see beyond your actions into the consequences. And I'll just mention two more because I can go on. I think curiosity is a big one. In order to, for me, that in order to really think about or to go beyond seeing the surface level, you have to be curious about why things are a certain way. And you have to have a certain amount of curiosity as to what you can do, and that will lead to a bit of innovation and critical thinking. I think the last one I'll mention for the sake of time will be, okay, which one to pick?
Actually, why not just go through the list? I think that'll be interesting to kind of look at. No, legit.
Okay, well, okay, sure. So, so this continuous learning and personal development, which I think is very clear, it's connected to potential and connected to, becoming a better individual and never settling for the way things are, and things can always be better. There is trust, I think, is a massive one as well. Not just trusting in others, but also trusting in your own ability to be able to do things, even when you're uncertain, having that conviction in your own ideas. It could be wrong, but just trusting the process as well. And I think the last one I'll mention is a value I also have is actually it's coaching. It comes with belief in potential, but I believe that coaching is it's not just an action, but it's a mindset, and it goes hand in hand with potential, personal development, and continuous learning. So, I really could go on. So let me hear from you, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so I just want to have one follow-up question a little bit. Sorry, Irshad. Can you waiting a little bit? And like coaching and also personal development that's you already said is like a core values that driving you to making more impact and making more change making process. Are there any specific books or persons that uh, the viewers can read and can get that kind of values?
Let me have a think about it. Maybe at the end of the session, I can post some. I can post some links.
Sure, sure, sure. Okay, and we will asking for Irshad now for
So
what
my
is the core value
okay.
and the,
So my approach to it is a little bit different because I do have quite a few on my mind as well. But I would say that if I were to boil down one core value, both within the context of my work as well as like the context of how I'm approaching life right now, I would boil it down to learning through doing, as opposed to just learning through theory. So one of the reasons why is because when I first started my organization, something interesting to note is that I started it while embarking on a research project within a university setting. And one of the challenges that I've always had within that project is that I kind of wanted everything to be perfect, in the sense that I'll spend a lot of time reading, I'll spend a lot of time like making sure that like from an engineering point of view, like all the different things kind of fit together perfectly, and then only after 2 weeks of reading do I go into the lab a little bit and just like tinker. And every single time I did that, something not horrible, but like something always went wrong, essentially. And usually the things that go wrong are not things that come out from the textbook. They are really inane things, like inane things such as, oh, I didn't set this thing properly, or like this machine was broken, and like in the end it was a machine problem, we needed to fix it, this sort of thing. That's not things that could have been discovered if I didn't do. And moving into kind of the work that I do within my organization, moving away from me as an individual, one thing I started to also realize when running an incubator is that I think especially for the under 25s, and this year we just opened up our incubator to be for under 35-year-olds. The general sensing that I get for those that are slightly younger is that they kind of want to get everything perfect. The business model has to be perfect, the impact has to be perfect, everything has to be perfect right off the bat. To the point where it's sort of detrimental to their progress. And although there are things to be said about doing things imperfectly within the context of the impact space may result in like unintended consequences, but I think my philosophy is more of you should kind of do things um, that are small, that like optimize yourself for learning first, that would set you up for greater things later on. So you don't want to theorize your way to greatness. It's something that I have learned, not say the hard way, but like through a combination of like my own lab experience as well as observing a lot of young people trying to start companies, I guess.
wow, really informative information. And the next one is I want also continue the question is in the particular process of change making and when you doing some certain of uh, changing to other persons that join your incubator, join your process, how you making sure that this value is also came to their mindset and their process? Are there any particular process that you bring maybe to your colleague, maybe to your partners, so you're influencing your core value to other persons?
Interesting. Okay, so I would say that. So let me just talk about the context of maybe my immediate team members as well as the participants that go through my program. I would say that the approach has evolved over the years. So in 2018, I kind of didn't want them to make mistakes at all. I just wanted them to sort of go through the entire process in such a way that they go step by step and like outcomes accompany after that. The way that it has changed over time and something that I've been doing more for both my team as well as my participants is that I still push them very hard to like make progress, but at the same time, I set them up to be able to make mistakes in a very controlled manner. So in the sense that the me applying pressure in certain situations to get them to like output some things would actually cause them to uh, try not to be so theoretical and like actually get out there, either talk to the beneficiaries or like actually make a product or come up with like a market survey, let's say. And even if the thing that they do doesn't result in the outcome that they want, uh, I've taken it very, like I've made it a point to make sure that they are not penalized for the outcome, but rather like the outcome is something that they can learn from. And we make sure that all these mistakes happen early on prior to our culmination event, which is the demo day, so that they learn the importance of actually doing. They go through the process of like actually making a mistake and learning. They would feel a little bit more comfortable with making those mistakes so that they can make even more of them prior to the actual culmination event. And when I say that this is something that I allow my team to do, like basically, my team is a combination of people that are, a couple of them are full-time, most of them are all volunteers. The way that I try to make sure that it's not so daunting is that, especially for the volunteers, I make their scope of responsibilities narrow, but at the same time, wide enough for them to experiment a bit. And I try to encourage that experimentation. And I don't encourage them to make mistakes, but like I push them hard enough such that mistakes will happen. And I am very careful not to penalize them for the mistakes, but rather get them to reflect upon it. And through that, that's the only way that they will learn and improve. Yep. So that's a little bit of what I do to try to put it out there. But yeah.
And then for Jane, there are any particular value that you share to the colleague or to employee that doing jobs in Epics?
Yeah, well, I think values really come from the belief systems that you have, and they have to be seen in action. They have to be actionable, right? If not, it just becomes propaganda, I suppose. Right? It just becomes like words that you tell people when you feel like it. But an example of embedding values into operations would be in one of our programs. We work with a couple of indigenous communities, and part of the program, you are required to provide sweat equity. So instead of an exchange of money, there's an exchange of your time and your effort. And so in our program, in order to qualify, you have to provide sweat equity, and there's the trust that you will show up and you will do it. And there are times when the community partner we're working with or the grassroots partner, they may not show up. They may not attend and fulfill that. They may not attend and fulfill that requirement. But for us, we stand by the conviction that we're putting our trust in you. We're putting our effort in building this particular relationship, and we dig a little bit deeper to see what are the contributing factors as to why this individual hasn't shown up. So rather than just, so I'll give you an example. In a build, we had a homeowner who didn't show up to build his home. And some of the participants that were involved said, oh, in that case, we should take away his house. We should just dismantle it. He doesn't deserve it. And we actually had to pause and reevaluate where the sentiment came from, which it came from some volunteers. And we had to stand by our belief and our conviction, which was, we have agreed to give this house to this man. And we need to dig a little bit deeper and build the trust with this person for him to be accountable to us as well. So rather than seeing it on the surface, what are some of the contributing factors that would lead to why he didn't show up today? Is it because truly, if he misses a day or two, because the builds are 3 days long, if he misses 3 days of work, can he actually afford to miss those 3 days and not get that salary, because he won't be paid when he comes and builds with us? That's his contribution. And is that actually the barrier to him coming to join? Or is it because when we build, he doesn't, he may not feel comfortable enough to be within a group of, within our particular group because, you know, our cultures are so different. Did we not put enough effort in building the trust and the, you know, the bond between these two different cultures to make it a safe space for him to come and join? So that's an example of how we would take that particular value and expand it into operations and use it and see it in action. So that's just one example. Another one is, so within my team that I work with, trust is a really big component or trust is a really big value that I want my team to embody with me. And the reason for that is very simple. If you don't have trust built in place, your team will not be able to come to you when shit really hits the fan, right? They'll cover it up, they'll cover up the mess and pretend like, oh, this never happened, don't look here. But really that's not what you want from your team. You want your team to come to you and have that trust to be able to say, okay, it's either I messed up or this is not working or you messed up, but this is how we're gonna be able to deal with it. So there are times where I will, in our meetings or debriefs, I did this recently with my team actually, where I sat them down and said, I need to have discussion with you because with this particular team, because I can feel the tension building. And I know that it's either I'm starting to get frustrated or you are, and we need to address this before it becomes a problem and catching that early. And then from there, we went into sharing what are some of the tensions that we feel, where do they come from, and how can we move past it. But if I as a team lead or the leader did not approach it that way, in a sense that builds trust or opens a space for people to be able to give me that feedback, we'd never get to that point where data flows both ways. And it's as simple as that actually. So these are some examples of how it's been embedded in some of the processes.
Superb and really concise talks that we had, and I want to continue to the next question that we will having in discussion is like how you define change making. It's a movement, it's a mindset, cause, or maybe another else that in your top of mind. What is a change making and change making process? In even us as a change maker, what are the change maker for yourself?
So your question is like you're asking about how we define change making within
Yes.
our context or within
And in your context, okay, in more bigger context, it's also great. Maybe Irshad can go starting.
Yeah, understand. Okay, so maybe I'll just talk about like my wider context. So is it alright if I give a little bit of an expansion to what I do?
Sure.
In addition to the innovation program, the incubation program that I run, one other thing that I do is that I get youth from around Southeast Asia as well to map out different aspects of what's going on within their communities, within their countries. So we also focus quite deeply on the three verticals that we talked about: food and agriculture, clean energy, and circular economy. But the general idea is that we want them to talk about what their universities are doing, what their what government policies are being implemented, what businesses and startups are doing. And to me, change making is not just a process of making. All right. Okay. So I assume that change making in this particular context is both the action, but also an action that is hopefully positive, because there is that likelihood that change making can change into something bad. In my context, change making is not just learning through doing is like one important part, but I think as a community coming together, change making is having everyone have a collective understanding of what are the core issues that need to be solved in the first place before we actually go solve them. So as much as change making is the actions and the interventions that we make in companies and like our research projects and something, change making is also the whole process, the not very easy process of finding the language of what sustainability means within the Southeast Asian context for us to actually have a starting point on how to make changes within those three areas. We don't claim to be change makers in every single social issue out there. Like, I think that is done pretty well by like other organizations out there. I think what we're trying to do is more um, from the perspective of like, okay, I want to start a business and make a change. We don't want to just have people who like dream of being entrepreneurs and therefore we want them to be entrepreneurs. We want them to understand the landscape a little bit more, and that community action and their community understanding is what is change making to me. Yeah.
Okay, and then for Jen, maybe you can add more that what is change making in your perspective?
Sure. I think I totally agree with what was just said, actually. I think that's an important aspect to look at. I think change making, it's something, it cannot be separated as something that is a standalone experience or a standalone thing. Like, is it just a belief? Is it just an attitude? Because I do believe that everything is interlinked. So starting with, I think change making it starts with a belief that things can be done a certain way or done a different way. And we assume that it means that that's done in a way that's more beneficial for the greater good or for a larger segment of society rather than just individual pursuit. So it starts with that belief, and then it moves into, obviously, beliefs shape your values, which shape the behaviors, which shapes the actions that you take. And those actions can lead you to many, many different paths, I believe. But the whole point is that those actions would be catalysts towards creating shared values with others in a community sense that drives collective impact, and which drives collective impact, and which at the ultimate end would change community behaviors and make access to different lifestyles and different opportunities available. So it is, in a nutshell, it starts with that belief that things can be different and things can be better, but for a purpose and for the greater good. And through your individual sense of being able to do something differently, or the interest that you have, whether it's in business or whether it's in volunteering or whether it's in advocacy, for example, for a particular cause. There are many, many different paths to take, but at the end of the day, it comes down to collective action and collective impact, and being able to open up different accessibility to be able to live that different life and to change these industries or to change the benchmarks of how businesses are working. But yeah, I think Irshad really narrated that quite beautifully.
I think it's interesting. Like, sorry, Vanji, just to jump in. Like the fact that I think we kind of came at it from two pretty different, not say perspectives, but like it kind of converged. And I found the whole notion of change making basically like being boiled down to collective action that kind of stems from a core belief. Like that's not something I previously considered. So thanks for sharing that point of view.
Well, I'm glad I could add some value. Yeah, I mean, the actions have to come from somewhere, right? You don't just suddenly become interested in wanting to create a business that will address a particular pain point that the world is facing. But it has to come from that belief somewhere that actually things can be done differently. And why hasn't this happened? Why haven't we been able to do this? So there's a kind of belief that's in place, I think, for all change makers that keeps us aligned. It's just that, how we do things maybe are different, and that's where a lot of diversion happens.
Okay, and to continue with this conversation about changing, the next question is how you see a change as a process. People is passionate to doing a change right now. People is strive to making a change in their self or in their communities, or there are maybe like a condition like, okay, we really like with the status quo that already happened. We don't need like so major change in our society. Are that condition is happen right now, or people is still striving for change?
Well, I think that we have seen, I think that there has been change, and it has been quite quick, actually. I mean, if you look at the values that I carry and the values that my parents carry and their grandparents carry, we're very, very different. And the kind of businesses that are coming up now, the kind of services that are emerging, I think there is proof, actually. There's a lot of proof and evidence that shows that there is change that's happening within the system. But of course, for different communities and for different groups, the change may not be happening fast enough. And I think that's where some of the complications arise, because it also comes down to a point of privilege. To me, it may seem like it's very fast, but to some of the marginalized groups and the communities that I'm working with, they still don't have their basic human rights in place, and they haven't had it for 50 years. Plus more, I'm sorry, 50 years is a very short amount of time, but before that with slave trade and everything. But so it also depends on that perspective. But I do believe that change is happening and that we have seen it, and there's evidence for that.
Okay. Maybe Ershad want to add something?
Maybe I'll take it more from the context of what I see in Singapore. So like I'm based in Singapore, and I think there are a couple of things that make me quite hopeful that there's a certain process that's like underway, and there are people, like ordinary people, basically driving this process. The whole notion of like charitable giving is nothing new, and to be fair, there are definitely some issues associated with it, which we'll not go into today. But I think for what it's worth, given the viral situation that we're going through right now, for some reason, it really did bring out the best in the people over here, in the sense that a couple of things have happened. So, the government has given handouts to basically everyone in Singapore, so that people can kind of tide over a lot easily, that sort of stuff. There have been basically entire movements predicated on people giving their entire whatever handout that they were given, all of it directly to either charities that require it, or people have actually gone down to interview people in very, very difficult situations, got their details, put them in a list in a way that doesn't compromise their privacy. And there are basically all of these grassroots movements that are happening, where the only gap that is present right now is that people don't have ready access to jobs, and people need resources right now. And the generosity associated with everyone with that innate desire to, if not make a systemic change, but make a direct contribution right now, is something that makes me quite hopeful for the future as well. And okay, I'm not going to get political about this, so maybe let me skip the second point and jump to the third point. I guess within the context of I was thinking more along the lines of volunteerism and stuff in Singapore as well. So without getting political, there is a very tangible bad situation going on within the foreign worker community right now, and the amount of time and effort that a lot of university students are giving right now, both on the campaigning side, which I won't touch on too much, but also on the operational side. Doctors require this, therefore I will go whatever lengths it needs to take. I will need to take in order to make sure that resources are provided to the doctor in a timely fashion, or foreign workers require emotional support, therefore I'm going to spend time WhatsApp calling them or WhatsApping them, or interacting with them some way. I think underlying all of this, and it's not just Singaporean youth, I think it's not something that a lot of Singaporeans as a whole kind of see that, there are certain cracks beginning to form, there are certain groups that are marginalized as well as in very, very difficult situations, and I'm very heartened by the fact that people step up, and that I don't think that sort of that kind of sort of existed, but a lot of times, especially in decades before, people tended to want to stay low, but in the face of adversity, people have started to see that we can't just stay low. It might not be the safest situation, we might not even have our jobs like 3 weeks, like 1 month down the line. But I have this money now, I have this time now, I'm going to give it to someone else. And that, in the context of Singapore at least, like makes me quite hopeful that change is being driven by everyday people.
Okay, and to going with this discussion that Irshad is already bring, that the next question is, there are some interesting anecdote that you can share about how meaningful is individuals doing their little things in bringing a change, like volunteerism, and also doing like a community service that already told by you, Ashad, and coming that pathway. In the end, this person is achieving small impact that can become more bigger impact in the future. Can you see this kind of thing is coming?
Maybe I can, maybe Jane, you can go first so I can think of one more anecdote.
Yeah, sure. I think it's great that you brought up small actions that people can take and how it adds up, because a lot of the pressure, I think, that comes from the term change maker is where people think they have to give up their lives and make a 180 change in everything that they do. But sometimes you just start small. And I believe that every individual has a role to play in bringing about change, and you don't need people who are going to become full-time advocates and activists to make change happen all the time. You need them to be in place, but you also need the smaller actors to just make to show, for example, through commodities. Your wallet is one of the best ways to vote for things. That's a term that I've heard very often, which is vote with your wallet. Show people where you want to place your hard-earned cash, right? And so you see people doing that in small ways with looking at the products that they buy, to larger ways, to working with ethical companies and companies that have clear sustainability plans and who are walking the talk, not just putting it in their sustainability report. So one of the ways is really to vote through your wallet and show people through through those means. That's one way. Other ways that I've seen people do, I think in particular, during this particular crisis moment with COVID-19, Malaysia has been super active in the volunteering scene in terms of all of these, the amount of resources that were allocated towards these different communities in the beginning of COVID-19, fundraisers and the grocery drives, and people like my own friends would, I don't know if I should say this. Well, they didn't exactly follow all of the restricted movement control orders, and they would sneak out of their houses to make sure that different groups would have food and medicine and things like that during the early stages when nobody could exit, nobody could leave their homes, and the curfew was enforced. So there are lots of small ways, and I think it's important to know that the small actions that you take, they really do add up, especially when you have many people doing it at the same time.
So I can jump in with an anecdote by
Sure.
not by my organization, but actually a very small two-person team in Singapore called Sustainer. So basically, their business model centers around selling sustainable goods, whereby they encourage BYO culture. So that sort of thing. They have recognized in this day and age that this whole thing about selling more BYO stuff, there are certain issues associated with it, which she's actually openly talked about webinars before. But one thing that she decided to do during this period, especially now that movement is a little bit more free around Singapore, we can go out in groups of 5 to different places. So as someone that started the company because she wanted to make sure that there was less plastic waste in the ocean, hence sustainable, what she did was basically a simple beach cleanup. And she called it the East Coast Beach Plan, whereby it was basically 3 different groups. It was sustainable, this social enterprise called Green Nudge, and this social media advocate called The Weird and the Wild. So they organized 3 separate groups of people going to the East Coast Beach in Singapore to clean stuff up. So all in all, not the most innovative idea, like, oh, beach cleanup, like where have I heard that one before, like so many times. But I think what was fascinating about this was, firstly, one of the reasons why she wanted to do this was because of the fact that we no longer had that many cleaning stuff. Like the trash was really getting quite bad. The second thing is that with COVID kind of being basically the thing, and disposable masks kind of being everywhere, like that was also a problem to the marine life that was the few marine life that actually existed within Singapore. I'm not sure whether they posted the picture of like one of the sea turtles getting stuck with one of the masks, which was actually in itself quite problematic. And the third thing is that like she didn't want to prove a point. She just wanted to go to the beach and do it with some of her friends to clean it up. And I think what was magical about what she did was that now within the span of like 2 weeks, they had like 1,000 people within their Telegram group that basically hopped in to volunteer to clean out the beaches as time went on. And I want to stress again, like there's nothing particularly innovative about the idea, but the whole idea behind doing the thing because it's a thing that needs to be done right now, and not because like it's glorious or like something that's going to change the world permanently. I think that's something that I really admire about the actions that they do, and I do believe that there are a lot of these, there are a lot of similar things that happen around. Like you don't really have to do something that's going to be like world changing right off the bat. Like just allowing yourself to go through the process of like cleaning up, allowing yourself to talk to these people, allow ideas kind of germinate while picking up trash with your tongs, going like, "Aya, why is there so many of this XYZ trash? Hey, this thing is originating from a particular company. Why don't we go talk to them or something?" That's something that I feel has already been going on, and it's magical. I do think that that is the anecdote that kind of sticks in my mind with regards to the sustainability side of things. I made a couple of other anecdotes related to the more social things. I think as much as I'm within the space of like sustainability innovation, it's still very telling that like the anecdote that I think about is that beach cleanup thing. Yeah.
Maybe the follow up of your information and your thoughts that already happened is, do you feel that people around us in this COVID condition and they are already doing volunteerism, doing making sure that people can get fit when there are lockdowns, are doing and creating an impact? Are this kind of small steps that already happen is creating impact? Or maybe like creating impact is like you need to clean all the ocean, you need to making sure that there are no plastic waste, we need to making sure that all the company is 100% ethically doing their business. And what your thought in that particular condition or area?
Jane, do you want to take this first, or do you want me to take it?
You can go ahead.
So, I think going back to some of the things I said, I do feel that there's a space for both, in the sense that like there is definitely a need for like these individual interventions to be made, these individual actions to be made, and at the same time, like there is a reason why large like organizations that try to push large changes are a thing, and like they, for what it's worth, like they are important organizations. But I feel that so since we're kind of talking about like ordinary people achieving impact, I do think that the role of all these like individual interventions like should not be understated, because like I said, like it's the precursor to not just influencing other people around you to also, if not do things a certain way, but think in certain ways, which is a process. Like the whole idea of like changing people's mind is a very long drawn out process that sometimes only really gets drilled through when people see actions being taken. So that's one thing. Another thing is that the whole process of like taking all these individual, non-permanent, non-systemic changey sort of actions allow you to germinate in your head certain ideas that may eventually lead you to that point. I'm not saying that like everyone should always aspire to do that. Like if you can, I think that would be great because like, there's a lot of positive change that can come about through some sort of systemic level intervention. But these things don't happen overnight, and it is important to have all these like small little things, not just to make that direct impact, but also to kind of allow ideas to incubate in your mind to make those systemic impacts later on. And to make sure that you're not systemically trying to entrench something worse than what already is, but rather to actually think about like how to systemically change things for the better, whatever that means. And that in itself requires a lot of thought. Like what is better? Let's not get into that.
Yeah, yeah, it's completely true. You have different. I think it's important that it's important to note that there are different levels of accessibility. So, for example, somebody who's just kind of starting out is starting to be aware that there even is a problem. Um, will see small ways in which they can, they can contribute, versus somebody who has been very exposed and is now familiar with the systemic issues involved in the different organizations and all of the levers that really contribute to this particular issue, may be able to find deeper ways to be involved and committed through other means, whether it's looking at the supply chain, looking at the actual operations of it, looking at the policies, versus being on the other spectrum where it's your individual actions and the small steps that you can take. But I think that they're all on the spectrum, and it's very hard to just pull one out and say this is more important than the other, because they need to be together. They need to be aligned. If you look at, for example, if you look at certain policies, if you look at policies that are in place, policies are in place to regulate certain behaviors, to make sure that the outcome is meets a specific goal, for example, that's supposed to be of the benefit of the receiver at the end. But if your citizens don't follow your policy, they don't take those small actions and follow through, and the policymaker at the top, all of that effort and that large scale systems thinking is wasted. So it's integrated. They all need to be seen as part of the process. And I think it's also another thing that I'm kind of struggling with in this day and age is the concept of cancel culture. So, where if, for example, if a person has started, let's say, a person has started to show an interest in changing their or making different choices that are better for the environment, let's say, but perhaps that one day they didn't follow through with that particular choice that they've stated or intended to, then the amount of people who can just cancel all of the effort that they've done in the past because of that one choice, I think it's a dangerous place to be. So, whether you have to go 100% all out, or whether you want to take a few small steps and start to explore and just grow and learn about the challenges and find out more about the different problems at hand, I think they all come together. But one thing I'm careful of is always expecting the 100% and expecting the deep dive, because not everybody's capable of that. And it's also not exactly, I wouldn't say it's fair to put everybody in the deep end straight away. Not everybody can swim.
Maybe I just want to little bit of follow up a question regarding the policy, and like there are so many policy in this world that really came from top, not from the bottom, and it's making the process of changing and making the requirement of the policy itself to can be enacted as dual. And sometimes people is like thinking like, oh no, this kind of policy will be making us backward like 5 or 10 times. And it's really happen in, there are some of policy like happen in Indonesia also in this kind of COVID condition that make us like thinking like, okay, why the government is thinking this kind of policy. And to subset of this kind of not connected change of process, are you saying that this particular of small step that already happens by change maker or by ordinary persons need to be looked by the policymaker, so the policy can be in line? Or it's okay that policy have the more helicopter view that can be happen maybe 1 or 2 years, but in this right moment, maybe change maker or just ordinary people that bringing the change?
Ooh, I think it's a bit of a tough question. I think the policy is supposed to reflect, the progression of the country and where it's supposed to go. But it also greatly depends on the country itself and the identity of the country, where their values are, what their religious beliefs are, and what the majority of people actually want. There was a statement that was asked, which said, "Do you believe that people get the leaders that they deserve?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know." But to a certain degree, I think there's some truth in that. I think there's some truth in that question, because if the individuals don't rise up to show what they want or to collectively take action against what they perceive to be an injustice, or or to highlight a better way of doing things, if people don't collectively show that this is what people want, then again the communication is not being fed upwards, and so the communication is not two ways, or it's not as accurate as it should be. So that's a bit of a tough question, because it really depends on country to country. Some countries actually may not be at that point yet. And I think that goes back to how we're talking about small actions that you can take. So enough people taking those small actions to show that this is actually the kind of society we want to live in. This is how we want to be progressive about things. This is how we want to change things, coming together to create a tipping point so that there's enough evidence that shows this is where we want to go. I think that is the action that needs to be taken. But if the individuals don't take that action, then you get the leader that you deserve, I suppose. It's a very painful topic right now for us in Malaysia, because yeah. I'll just end with that. So yeah.
It's not only in Malaysia. I think in many parts of the world, people is thinking about that kind of situation, like, oh no, we got a really bad policy maker. We not get the great leader with this kind of pandemics that happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe sure, please
add one more. So that's where I think that those individual change makers really do make a difference. And if you think about the different people in your camp, you have people who have very strong opinions, and you've got people who are in the middle, sitting on the fence, so to speak, right? And it's really the small actions that you take, the individual touches that you give, and the conversations that you have with the people who may be able to be swayed to live a certain way, or to take different things more seriously, to recycle better. So a great example of a policy was a recycling policy that was implemented here, I think in Selangor, where our recycling centers wanted to really start to separate waste and whatnot, but it was up to the individual households to really follow through and make sure the policy can get implemented by separating your trash at home, washing your recyclables first, etc., things like that. And because people don't do that, the targeted amount that we would like to have recycled at our centers, we haven't reached our targets. It's because at the individual level, we aren't taking those small steps and enforcing those behaviors to make the policy successful. But lots of great things have happened. It's just an example of the connection between policy and behavior.
Irshad, you want to add some more?
Sure. So maybe I'll give a slightly more, very, very slightly more optimistic point of view on like policy and like the potential disconnect that can happen between the policymakers as well as like the realities on the ground. For what it's worth, and this coming from someone that's never worked in government and probably will never work in government. But as someone who has quite a few friends who work in there, who talk a lot about not so much like their whether they feel satisfied in that, but more like their process, talk about like how hard they work and stuff. I do have, at least within the context of Singapore, like, some level of confidence that in the public service and the civil service, there is a lot of thought being put into the policies and a lot of work going in, not just to look at the examples of what other countries are doing, but increasingly what is happening is that market research agencies are being engaged. Data science and like data insight units within different ministries are starting to emerge, where the entire idea is for them to like act as a third party, not arbiter, but like a third party hub of information that is there to advise as opposed to there to kind of create the policy. So those sorts of things are starting to happen. But I think for government, like one of the reasons why there's a disconnect in my view is just because of the scale of the like regardless of the government that you're in, like the scale of the organization of government as a whole is one of the things that makes it quite challenging for them to react to things that are going on the ground. And once a policy has been set, that policy is going to be there for years. And as much as I'm always of the opinion that we can always do better. Like they are accountable to his people after all. Not just the politicians, but also like the civil servants. I wouldn't just on my side like complain too much about like our politicians not being good, our civil service not being good. Even though I do have my grievances, like I would recognize where they are putting in measures, even if it might be a bit slow or very slow in some certain cases. But yeah, just wanted to give a little bit of a positive point of view from my end, because I do think that for the people working in public service and civil service, they do deserve that credit, but they also do deserve more pressure.
Yeah, we definitely have some champions. And we'll see where things go. I have no idea right now. It's very unpredictable.
Actually, yeah, the idea of like champions within organizations is actually one interesting, like come to think of it, like that's also an interesting way where an ordinary person of sort can actually leverage on what they're doing. Like you were mentioning just now, like
Yeah,
everyone's kind of on the spectrum, and if they just happen to champion on something in a space that they can influence it, like, yeah, that's actually a good way to.
I think don't underestimate the amount of influence that you have as one individual, actually.
Really quotable word that you have. Okay, and we will go for the last question. So, in your own countries, which is the area that you think that there are really an urgency to bring more ordinary people to achieving impact? What kind of area that, okay, there are not many change maker in that particular area, or that this particular area is really major problems that's a root cause that we need to solve together. And maybe a place that, okay, people need to came and doing change in that particular area. So maybe Jane can start it.
How do I get into this without just?
If you want, I can go first.
Yeah, you can go first.
Let me just compose and think about how I want to frame this.
Sure.
Sure.
So I already have my answer like right off the top of my head, and so, like interestingly, like I'm not going to talk so much about the environmental sustainability stuff. Like I think that's something that, while urgent, is something that is like it kind of has continuous effort kind of being made in that realm. So I won't go too deep into that. I would say that like in the context of Singapore, what I truly believe is a matter that I think is both overdue and like I do believe that there is a certain urgency to it. Is the matter of like race and racism within the context of Singapore. So not just that like, oh, I'm someone who belongs to a minority race here, and like therefore like I am unhappy, therefore let's change things. I think on a more fundamental level, one thing that hasn't been figured out yet is how do we even enter a discourse about it. And the reason why I think that this is one prime example of an issue that ordinary people, or rather like we need to collectively do something about, is because we really do have the capacity to be able to do something about it. Like there are ways from like a small friend group perspective, for example, like, there are ways that we can talk about it in an like these are uncomfortable topics, but we can do it in such a way where like the aim is not so much to change perspectives but to open up perspectives a little bit more. And I do think that because of its potentially toxic nature, it's something that requires a lot of time to do something about, and it's one of those things that should have happened yesterday. So as ordinary people, and like it's something that I myself have struggled with communicating, because for the longest time I didn't want my identity to just be tied up in the fact that I belong to a certain race. But I think at the end of the day, like it is something that within the course of my lifetime is something that people are a little bit more comfortable with talking about, and people are a little bit more comfortable with not tying up too much of their identity within it while still maintaining a certain connection to it. Like I think that would be a success, even if like the realities of like human nature and racism still exist. I still think that's enough of a reason for us to kind of engage with it as individuals, because we can't expect like our leaders to mandate things when the fact of the matter is that like the whole idea of people mandating things is just going to cause certain pushbacks. And yeah, that's one issue that I do think has an urgency to it, and is something that something can be done about.
Okay, Jane, can you give us the condition in Malaysia?
I will try. I mean, there are lots of things actually that pop up. Whether one is more urgent than the other, it's really tough to say. But off the top of my head, I think well, when we're talking about racism, I think that's something that is directly applicable within Malaysia as well. And there's maybe it's a global thing, but there's like a widening gap between different ideologies. And there's also a widening disinterest to bridge that gap that I feel anyway, or that I see. And so a lot of that racism does stem from questions of identity, which makes it so difficult, because you question a person's identity, you're questioning them essentially. And so in Malaysia, it's kind of tricky because identity, there are different groups that have their identity is actually written into our constitution, and Malaysia, it's tricky because it's not just the citizens, but it's also a blend of religious ideologies and what the country is supposed to uphold. So it makes it that much trickier. So if you don't agree with certain perspectives, and so I also that those religious ideologies, they also bleed into the policies, and they bleed into the way that the country is governed. And an example of that, let's say, is the issue that we have with child marriages, for example, or the lack of sex education in schools, which leads to the lack of educated adults and teenagers who have to deal with the consequences of not knowing this particular information. And so we also have things like baby dumping that's been increasing here, and things like that. So it's quite, it's really interlinked in terms of where the challenges are. But I do agree that the widening ideologies and the ripple effect of the racism that we've seen, we're now seeing the fruits, so to speak, of the seeds that were planted many years ago. So it's something that is deeply systemic, and it will be difficult to uproot, so to speak, because it has grown, and it's yeah. So lots of things. Another issue that I think is important. So I do think crossing that I don't know whether you'd call it peacekeeping initiatives or whatnot, but crossing that area, having that dialogue, being willing to accept different perspectives and ideologies is a huge thing. And looking at how that leads into our policies, bleeds into our education, leads into the narratives actually that we share about each other. And this doesn't just end with, it also includes things like the different, a major issue that has been this climate challenges, and there's also issues of the of indigenous peoples around the world. Almost in every country, indigenous communities face intense marginalization and don't have access to the same kind of resources that are required for them to really be thriving in our communities. So things like in Malaysia, a big challenge is indigenous communities not having access to permanent land, because in Malaysia, when land is gazetted for, it's a forest reserve, it's a reserve that can be changed later into agricultural land or different types of development. So a lot of these communities actually don't have a permanent sense of where of themselves, because their land is not their own. So actually there are so many, but I think I would, I think goes back to, let's think more, judge less, and take small steps together. Don't stop trying.
Don't stop trying. Wow. Okay, so the question from me is already finished, but we already have some of Q&A from the participant, and I will pick one that it's not answer. So how do you affirm your belief, and how do you know you are affirming the right belief? Can maybe Ershad can give us the first question, and then Jane can follow up.
Sure. So for a while, I think about 6 months, I was kind of toying around with this philosophy that is quite prevalent within the startup space in the US, that of having strong opinions but weakly held. So the whole idea is that within this framework, what you were supposed to do is to have strong opinions about different issues, in the sense that you're not someone that exercises nuance in the way that you present your ideas, but you are someone that is able to change those ideas really, really quickly if they have been disproven. So the merit behind that process, which I was trying to use for a while, is that it really forces you to, before you kind of stick to a belief, you kind of really need to reflect on why you as an individual, with the information that you have, hold those pieces of those beliefs in the first place. I think what I would do right now, and one common piece of criticism that's levied upon this particular framework, is that it does encourage people to kind of switch between ideologies way too quickly, which is essentially the opposite problem. But I think for what it's worth, I take this. I still continue to take the spirit of the approach, in the sense that I like knowing about different points of view. I like to kind of go to places where the polar opposites are happening, and kind of make my way through the center. The challenge with that approach is that it really takes a lot of time. So what I've been doing in order to keep myself sane while still trying to make sure I don't end up in an echo chamber is to pick certain topics that I want to follow a little bit more closely, read quite widely about those topics, and for lack of a better way to do it, trust the judgment of people that are close to me, who are around me, to actually inform me of other things. And I think the lucky thing about my group of friends and my family is that although they do hold pretty strong opinions about certain things, they are also pretty open to explaining in very, very great detail why they hold those beliefs, and why certain issues that are affecting things around the world, and all, why they hold those beliefs, and why something is wrong. That's kind of where I get my information from right now. Just trusted people, me consuming as much information as I can about certain topics, and just knowing that things are always going to be a work in progress. I mean, to be very honest, I am still not fully at peace with that approach, because I also know that there are certain things that have reached the point where you should sort of know what's fundamentally right or wrong, and me not knowing those things does cause me quite a bit of discomfort. But I live with the comfort that I would eventually get to know, and I would eventually start to form certain points of view that not say they wouldn't change, but they are backed up by strong beliefs that are informed by me looking at both sides of the issue. So that's how I try, but it's not a perfect process.
Yeah, I think those are really good points. Strong opinions weakly held, was that the term? That's great. I think well, it starts with where your moral framework is, I think. Which is like really the origins of your belief systems, what you believe is wrong and right. Where does that come from? Actually, how were you taught that? And identifying the origins of those beliefs that you carry. But that's just the beginning. That's just the starting point. Then you build your convictions and you test things out. And I think it's a process of iteration. It's a process of testing and trying and discovering. And you have to be open to maybe being wrong as well. Like maybe you were wrong, but you still have to move with the convictions that you have. And you have to be willing to test those. You have to be willing to build the evidence for those convictions. And if you don't find the evidence, perhaps it's time to rethink that. So when I say evidence, it's like the analogy of the tree, for example, right? The seeds that you're planting, eventually those seeds will form and grow into something. And what do the consequences of those seeds look like? What does the fruit, so to speak, look like? If the consequences are actually causing more disharmony, it's causing greater unrest. It doesn't have as many benefits as you think. People are not profiting from the benefit of it, and I think that's in a greater good sense. Then is that the right seeds to be planting? So really, I think it starts with where your moral framework is based and whether you believe that all individuals are born equal and have the same opportunities and should be allowed the same accessibility, and how do you make those things happen?
Okay, really great conversation that we had in this evening, and I'm really sorry that this session of question will be stopped because there are some of our speaker need to run a little bit, right? And thank you so much, Jane and Elshad, for your time to giving us really insightful conversation regarding how people can bring change, how philosophies in your activity and your change making process is happen. Before I close, so after this we will also have a webinar series in next 2 weeks. So if you guys want to join, there are plenty of more intriguing sessions. And also we will have a toolkit that can be accessed from the website opai.me. That the toolkit, it will be launched in September, and we will also keep in touch with you guys because we will have a newsletter to give you information. And thank you so much for the attendees that still stick to us until the end. And I will give end quote from both of panelists. Maybe Irshad can do first, and then the last one maybe Jane.
Wait, end quote on what?
On this session, just one phrase.
Okay. Maybe not a phrase. Maybe just a short reflection. Like honestly, coming into this, where the topic of discussion was like actionable philosophies. Like, I actually came into this not actually knowing what my overall underlying philosophy was. So I kind of felt that this session was actually quite helpful to stress test both some of my ideas, but also to I think Jane, like thanks so much for like sharing the stuff that you had, because it's allowed me to kind of think about certain things that I do in slightly more different perspectives, like not in something that's like completely overhauling the way that I do things, but it has really helped me to kind of see things in slightly different but still very prominent ways. Yeah. So just thanks for kind of like helping me sort out my mind a bit. Yeah, this was fun.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. And maybe for the last closing quote.
Great. Well, I'm really glad to hear that. Yeah, Daniel also told me this is going to be really casual. Just have fun. So thank you so much for the, the casual conversation. I'm sure, Evandri, you'd like to leave your car now. I guess a quote that always comes to mind, and I think I think you all have heard it, but it's it's really simple. It's start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. As simple as that. Really, that's the basic. Yeah, we all can do that, right?
Yeah, wow, really cool. Okay, thank you everyone for the time, and we will stop the session and see you soon in the next OPAI webinar. Thank you all.
All
Bye.
right, thanks guys.
Bye. Bye.